Rain washed down the cracked sidewalks of Maple Avenue, blurring the chalk lines where neighborhood kids used to play. The storm came heavy and cold, like the kind that makes memories ache. On the porch of a small, weather-beaten home stood Henry Robinson, 78, a retired bus driver with hands calloused from decades of honest work. Beside him, his wife Louise clutched the brass key that hung from her neck on a faded blue ribbon, the key that had opened their front door for 40 years. Across the street, a crowd gathered beneath umbrellas. Phones hovered in trembling hands. The whispers spread before the sheriff even stepped out of his car. "They're evicting the Robinsons." The man leading the charge, Victor Crane, slick-haired and smug, held the eviction notice like a prize. "Time's up," he called, voice slicing through the rain. "City says this property's condemned. You've had your notice." Henry pressed his cane against the porch floorboards, steadying himself. "Condemned?" he said quietly. "This house raised 5 children. It buried 2 parents. It's more alive than you'll ever be." Victor's grin didn't flinch. "Then maybe you should have sold while you still could. Prices don't wait for nostalgia." Louise's lips trembled, but she stood taller. Her voice was soft, but every word carried steel. This home was the first deed a black family ever signed on this block. It cost more than money. It cost years of dignity, patience, prayer. Victor's eyes flicked toward the cameras. "Save the speeches, ma'am. I follow the law." Behind him, movers shifted nervously. The sheriff sighed and adjusted his hat. "Let's just keep this civil. Civil." Henry's tone cracked into a bitter laugh. "That's what they said when they told me to sit at the back of the bus. Civil." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the storm. Louise's fingers found his hand. He squeezed once, slow and steady. "They can't take what's ours," he whispered. Then, a low, powerful hum. Headlights cut through the rain as a black sedan rolled to the curb. The crowd turned, murmuring. The driver's door opened and out stepped a woman in a navy blue suit, her stride calm, measured, deliberate. She didn't carry an umbrella. She didn't flinch at the rain. Victor frowned. "Who's this now?" The woman said nothing at first. Her gaze swept across the crowd, over the sheriff, past the movers, and landed squarely on Henry and Louise. Her expression softened. "Mr. and Mrs. Robinson?" Louise blinked, confusion and recognition flickering together. "Yes, who are you?" The woman smiled faintly, pulling a leather folder from her bag. "Someone who's not letting anyone steal your home." The crowd stilled. Even the rain seemed to quiet. Victor's smirk faltered, and in that single moment before anyone could speak again, everything changed. "Before we go any further, if this were on screen, remember this moment, because what happened next proved that when love stands tall, injustice doesn't stand a chance." The storm softened to a drizzle. Louise brushed her fingers over the brass key as thunder rumbled somewhere far away. Inside, a gospel song hummed through the old radio, the same one that had played the day they first moved in, and for the first time that morning, hope flickered, faint but unbroken. The rain had slowed to a mist, hanging in the air like the breath of the past. Inside the house, the warmth smelled of lemon oil, coffee, and years of living. Louise wiped her glasses with the edge of her cardigan, watching the woman outside speak quietly with the sheriff. Her voice carried authority, calm yet commanding, the kind that made people listen. Henry stood by the window, his reflection blending with hers. "She walks like someone who knows where she's going," he muttered. "You recognize her?" Louise shook her head. "No, but there's something in her eyes, something familiar." He looked down at his hands, at the deep cracks in his knuckles. "Maybe God finally sent us someone who sees us." The house creaked softly, old wood shifting like a body turning in its sleep. Every wall held a story, every corner a struggle. 40 years earlier, this home hadn't been much more than a patch of land and a dream. Henry had worked double shifts driving the city bus, his first union job after the factory closed. The bank officer who approved their mortgage had told him, "You're lucky, Mr. Robinson. Not many colored families buy here." He remembered answering, "We're not lucky. We're ready." Those words had echoed through the decades like a promise he refused to break. Now, the neighborhood had changed. The faces, the prices, the rules, everything but this porch. This was still their place. They're proof that they belonged somewhere. Louise traced her fingers along a photo frame on the mantel, a younger Henry in his uniform, standing beside her in a Sunday hat the day they'd moved in. They wanted us gone even back then, she whispered. Every time we painted the fence, someone threw mud on it. Henry chuckled dryly. Guess we gave them something worth hating. Outside, the woman in the navy suit, Amber, was showing documents to the sheriff. The crowd had grown quieter. A few people began to lower their phones. Something about her presence made the air heavier, more serious. She ain't from the city, Henry said, peering closer. That's a military stance if I ever saw one. Louise nodded slowly. Whoever she is, Victor doesn't like her. Look at his face. Victor Crane stood stiff beside his luxury car, his umbrella tilted too high, rain streaking across his suit jacket. He checked his phone twice, pacing. Whatever confidence he'd had was cracking, same as the cheap asphalt he parked on. Louise turned from the window, her voice trembling with quiet conviction. Maybe all our prayers weren't for nothing. Henry smiled, tired but proud. Faith's like rust, he said. Once it sticks, it doesn't come off easy. A knock echoed at the door. 3 firm raps. Louise's breath caught. Henry tightened his grip on the cane, glancing at her once before opening the door. Amber stood there, soaked from the rain, the same calm fire in her eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, she said softly. We need to talk. And with that, the past they'd built and the future they feared finally met face to face. Amber stepped inside, leaving a trail of rainwater on the worn wooden floor. The house seemed to breathe her in, the smell of lemon oil, gospel vinyl, and slow-cooked memories settling around her like a quilt. She took a slow look at the living room, faded photos on the mantel, a hand-sewn quilt draped over the couch, a family Bible opened on the coffee table beside 2 half-drunk cups of tea. Louise's voice trembled. You said you were here to help. Who sent you? Amber took a breath. No one sent me. I came because I should have been here a long time ago. Henry frowned, gripping his cane. You talk like you know us. Amber hesitated, her fingers tightening on the folder. I do. She met their eyes, and for a moment, something flickered. Recognition. Faint, but real. My mother used to live across the street. Miss Evelyn Turner. Louise blinked, startled. Evelyn, from the Blue House? Lord, I used to babysit you when you were barely walking. Amber smiled softly. You did. And you gave my mama food when my daddy left. You said, no one on this street goes hungry, not while we got a kitchen. I never forgot that. The tension in Henry's shoulders eased, if only slightly. He gestured to a chair. Sit, child. Tell us why you're really here. Amber set the folder on the table, flipping it open to reveal documents, receipts, and a thick envelope stamped with the city's seal. I work for the housing department, and I've seen this developer's name too many times. He's using fake zoning permits, evicting elderly families, especially black homeowners, on false claims of unsafe structure. Louise's eyes widened. You mean, yes, Amber said firmly. What he's doing to you is illegal. Henry exhaled hard, his voice trembling with anger. We kept every paper, every payment. You telling me all this, I'm telling you, Amber interrupted gently, that you're not losing this house. Not on my watch. A small silence filled the room, deep and sacred. Louise reached for Henry's hand, her eyes glistening. You sound just like your mama, she whispered. Amber smiled faintly, brushing a drop of rain from her cheek. She'd say it's about time I used my job for something real. Thunder rolled in the distance. Outside, the crowd still waited. Phones ready, whispers rising like fog. Amber stood and looked toward the door. They'll be back soon, she said quietly. And when they come, we'll be ready. But first, she turned to Henry. Do you still have the deed? Henry nodded slowly, limping toward the hallway. Kept it where I keep my faith, he said. Top shelf of the Bible. Amber's lips curved into a grin. Then that's where this fight begins. The Bible was heavy, not from weight, but from years. Henry carried it from the shelf like it was a living thing. Its spine cracked faintly as he laid it open on the dining table. Inside, tucked between the Book of Psalms and a pressed magnolia petal, was a folded envelope yellowed at the edges. Amber reached for it carefully. This is your original deed, she said softly. And these, she pointed to a second envelope, thinner, newer, are payment receipts. handwritten but dated. All legal. Louise smiled faintly. I always told him never to throw away a receipt. Lord knows, I didn't trust that bank clerk's eyes on us. Amber nodded. You were right not to. She slipped on her reading glasses and flipped through the documents. Every record matches, until 3 months ago. That's when your property tax ID was changed. Henry blinked. Changed? By who? Amber's expression hardened. By Victor Crane's office. He's been buying up property using fake shell companies. He changes the tax ID, claims the owner's defaulted, and then files eviction through the city's backdoor system. Most families don't even realize it's fraud until it's too late. Louise gripped her chair. How many others? Amber looked up. Dozens. Mostly black elders. People who paid for their homes twice over, once in money and again in dignity. Henry's jaw clenched. And the city lets it happen? Amber hesitated. Sometimes the system doesn't see you unless you make it. The words sat heavy in the air. The old clock ticked once, twice. Outside, thunder grumbled over Maple Avenue. Louise rose, her voice quiet but steady. So what do we do now? Amber stood. We fight with proof. I'll file an emergency injunction tonight. Freeze the eviction. But we'll need witnesses, statements, everything that shows you lived here continuously. Henry nodded. Neighbors can talk. Pastor Green still remembers when we bought the place. Good, Amber said, and I'll need you both to stay calm. Tomorrow, Victor will come back, and he'll come angry. Louise reached across the table, covering Amber's hand. Child, you don't have to fight our battles. Amber's voice softened. I do, because this fight is bigger than your house. It's about everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, even after they built the street. Henry looked at her. Really looked. The girl who once played in puddles across the road was now standing tall, steady, carrying the same fire he used to see in civil marches on the TV. He smiled faintly. Your mama would be proud. Amber exhaled, blinking back sudden heat behind her eyes. Then let's make her proud. She gathered the papers into her case, rain tapping against the windows like an omen. In the reflection, Victor's car headlights flashed once down the block. He was coming back, and this time, the Robinsons wouldn't be alone. Headlights bled across the rain-slick street, white beams carving through the drizzle. Henry's hand tightened on his cane. He's here, he murmured. Amber closed the folder, her expression unreadable. Let him come. Louise peeked through the curtain. The black SUV rolled to a stop in front of their fence. The door opened and Victor Crane stepped out. Tailored suit, slicked hair, the kind of smirk that lived between arrogance and fear. Two movers followed him, muscles folded into matching gray jackets. Victor's voice cut through the rain. Evening, folks. Hope you packed light. Amber opened the front door before Henry could stop her. She stepped out, rain dripping down her collar, her badge clipped visibly to her blazer. Mr. Crane, she said evenly, you're trespassing on federal property under review. Victor laughed. Federal, please. You think that's going to scare me? I've done this dance 100 times. Old people sign bad paperwork, cry about it, and I clean up the mess. Henry appeared behind her, shoulders squared despite his limp. You don't clean up, son. You steal. The words landed hard. The neighbors began to gather again. Porch lights flickering on, cameras rising in hands. The same street that once looked away was watching now. Victor sneered. You think a crowd scares me? Amber took one step forward. No, she said, but truth does. She lifted a folder from under her arm and handed it to the sheriff who had just arrived. Raincoat half-buttoned, expression tight. Filed injunction. City court signed off this morning. Any attempt to remove the Robinsons is illegal. Victor's smile faltered. You don't have authority. Oh, I have more than that, Amber cut in, her tone sharpened steel. I have evidence. Tax ID changes, falsified transfer records, and sworn statements from 3 other families you tried to evict under the same scheme. The sheriff flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. These signatures don't match, he said quietly. Victor's eyes darted. Forgery? You're making this up. Louise stepped onto the porch. Cardigan soaked, but her voice clear. That's what you said the last time you left your card on our fence, that we'd thank you later. We don't thank thieves. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victor turned on her, rage cracking his facade. You people never know when to quit. Amber's voice dropped low, quiet but lethal. "Be very careful with your words." He opened his mouth to retort, but a car horn blared from the corner. A second vehicle pulled up, military decals gleaming under the streetlight. The driver's door opened and a tall man in uniform stepped out, rain sliding down his cap brim. Louise's breath hitched. "Is that—" Amber smiled faintly. "That's David," she whispered. "My brother." The crowd fell silent. Even Victor's breath seemed to stall. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about legacy. And tonight, it was coming home to fight. The rain turned steady, drumming against the hoods of cars and the porch roof like a heartbeat. David stood in the middle of the street. Tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform darkened by the downpour but his posture unshaken. When he looked at Victor, there was no anger in his eyes, only the quiet certainty of a man who'd seen worse battles and walked away standing. Victor's smirk faltered just slightly. "Who are you supposed to be?" "Security." David stepped forward, boots splashing in the puddles. "U.S. Army Major David Turner," he said calmly, flashing his ID. "And you're standing on property under federal review for housing discrimination. You might want to holster that tone before you dig deeper." A hush spread through the crowd. The cameras tilted upward, rain streaking across phone lenses. The man who had arrived like thunder now commanded the street without raising his voice. Amber joined him, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Voice firm. "We have court documents, eyewitness accounts, and a city investigator on call. You've exploited more than 10 black homeowners in this district, Mr. Crane. That stops tonight." Victor's eyes darted between them, searching for a crack to strike through. "You can't just storm in here with what?" Amber cut in sharply. "Proof? Integrity? People watching?" A ripple of applause broke from the porch across the street. Someone shouted, "Tell him, sister!" Louise leaned on Henry's arm, whispering, "That girl's got the fire." Henry nodded. "So does her brother." Victor turned toward the sheriff. "Are you really letting them interfere with official procedure?" The sheriff didn't answer. He just held up the injunction Amber had handed him earlier. The seal smudged slightly from the rain. "Eviction's frozen. Court orders valid." Victor's face flushed crimson. "You can't do this. These people are behind." David took another step, close enough that their shoulders nearly met. His tone was low but cutting. "You called them these people." The crowd went silent again. David's voice rose slightly, carried by conviction. For 40 years, this couple paid taxes, raised children, built a community, while you preyed on them like a vulture dressed in a suit. You call it business. I call it theft. Victor tried to speak, but the words stuck. The sound of rain filled the pause. Heavy, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. Louise looked down from the porch, tears mingling with rain. "We never wanted a fight," she said softly, but her voice carried. "But maybe God sent one for us." Amber turned toward her, nodding. "Not a fight, a reckoning." David looked over his shoulder at his parents. "Go inside," he said gently. "We'll handle this now." But Henry only shook his head. "No, son. We've handled enough in silence." The old man stepped forward, cane steady against the slick wood. And for the first time that night, the landlord realized the weakest man on the porch was the strongest one standing in the storm. The old man's cane hit the concrete with a hollow tap. Rain ran down his sleeve, dripping off the edge of his trembling hand. Henry looked straight at Victor, and for a heartbeat, the street went silent. "When I fought in '68 for this country," he said, his voice low but sharp, "they told me my skin didn't match the flag. I fought anyway. Came home, built this house with these hands. Every nail, every beam. And you think a piece of paper's gonna scare me out of it?" The crowd stirred, umbrellas rising like banners. Someone shouted, "Tell him, Mr. Robinson." Victor tried to laugh it off, but it came out tight. "You're a sentimental old man clinging to history. The world's moved on." Henry lifted his cane, not as a weapon, but like a gavel. "No, son. The world's catching up." The words hit harder than thunder. David stood behind him, shoulders squared. Amber took a step forward beside her father, voice firm. "And we're done letting men like you decide who belongs." Phones were up everywhere now. Neighbors, teenagers, even the local mailman who'd stopped mid-route. The story was live before it was even finished. Victor's eyes flicked toward the cameras. "You think anyone's gonna care?" I own half this block, Amber smiled thinly. Not for long. At that exact moment, a flash of blue lights washed across the street. A patrol car pulling up slow, deliberate. Out stepped Officer Reynolds, followed by a woman in a city inspector's jacket. She held a folder under her arm, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Amber. "Ms. Robinson," she called. "We received your complaint. We traced the property filings, and then she's right." She turned toward the sheriff. "Multiple violations. Fraudulent transfers. This man's permit is revoked." The sheriff's eyes widened. "Effective immediately?" "Effective now." Gasps broke through the crowd like sparks. Louise's hand flew to her mouth. Victor went pale, his voice cracking. "You can't. I have investors." Amber crossed her arms. "You had victims." David stepped forward, his voice heavy with calm authority. "You'll hand over every falsified document and account record, or I'll make sure federal housing gets them from your office directly. You understand me?" Victor's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Louise walked down the steps slowly, her cardigan clinging to her shoulders. She reached out and placed her hand on Amber's arm. "You saved us," she whispered. Amber looked at her mother and shook her head gently. "No, Mama. You and Dad saved us first, by raising us to never bow." Rainwater ran off the edge of the porch, washing over Victor's expensive shoes. He looked down, beaten, his papers turning to pulp in his hands. For the first time that night, the street felt clean, washed, renewed. Justice didn't come with noise. It came with calm, and it came home. The rain had slowed to a whisper. The crowd stood unmoving as if no one dared break the moment. The flashing police lights painted the street in red and blue streaks, reflecting off puddles like fading memories. Amber stood beneath the porch light beside her parents, her blazer clinging to her shoulders, her eyes bright with pride and exhaustion. David remained near the sheriff, arms crossed, watching as Victor Crane's empire crumbled, one fraudulent paper at a time. The city inspector looked up from her clipboard. "Mr. Crane, you're being investigated for property fraud, elder intimidation, and falsifying ownership transfers. You'll need to come with us." Victor's jaw trembled. "You can't," but the words died as two officers stepped forward, rainwater dripping off their hats. The handcuffs clicked loud enough for the whole street to hear. The same neighbors who had once whispered now clapped softly, a rhythm that grew into something stronger, like thunder turned to applause. Henry lowered his head, whispering a prayer under his breath. Louise clutched his hand. "You told me love would outlast all of it," she murmured. "You were right." Amber turned to her father. "It wasn't just love," she said. "It was loyalty. You raised us to stand up for what's right, not just for ourselves, but for others who can't." Henry smiled weakly, the lines on his face deep but proud. "Then I guess we did something right after all." The sheriff approached the porch, hat in hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, I'm sorry for what you've been through. This house is yours. Always was. Always will be." Louise's lips quivered. "We don't want revenge," she said quietly. "We just want peace." Amber looked around at the watching faces. Black, white, young, old. Neighbors who had seen injustice from their windows for too long. "Peace comes," she said softly, "when good people stop looking away." David stepped forward, voice steady. "My father taught me that freedom isn't given. It's defended. Every day, in every home." The rain began again, gentle this time, washing away the chalky footprints on the sidewalk. The porch light flickered once, then held steady, glowing warm over the family. Michael arrived then, late but smiling, umbrella in hand, camera crew behind him. "The story's already trending," he said, glancing at Amber. 500,000 views. People are calling it The Night Love Fought Back. Amber laughed softly, shaking her head. "Good. Let them see what love looks like when it refuses to move." Henry raised the brass key one last time. Its ribbon glistened in the light, old but unbroken. "This house isn't just wooden walls," he said. "It's proof that when you plant love deep, no one can uproot it." The cameras caught every word, every tear, every glimmer of hope in the rain, and as the credits of night rolled over the street, the Robinsons stood together, unshaken, undefeated, unforgotten. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it. Let the world see what happens when love and loyalty stand taller than hate. Comment below where you're watching from. Every story of strength deserves to be heard. Subscribe for more true, powerful stories that celebrate resilience, unity, and justice within our community. Because sometimes, the smallest house can hold the biggest kind of courage.